Good evening, sailors. I am really excited to bring these folks to speak with you all this evening. Adrian and Peter, they could do an entire 3-hour presentation on where they are right now doing this presentation. They're actually cruising in Alaska and they're coming to us through Starlink.
Really?
At a mooring up in Alaska. So these folks are awesome. They're doing the stuff many of us dream of doing. And one of the things I know many of us think about is what's up that way? You just kind of go up river. What would you find? Well, they went out and did it. They did it all the way as far as you can possibly go up river, up the Snake to Lewiston, Idaho. They did that a couple of years ago and have a story to tell. And I'm really and we look forward to your presentation.
Oh, this is good.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. We're Peter and Adrian. Very glad to be here and very glad to share with you what we've been up to. As Chris was saying, probably a different presentation. We're currently sitting at a mooring in Misty Fjords, Alaska, just a little bit east of Ketchikan, where we got here in about over the last 6 weeks. But the presentation is upstream to Idaho. So let us tell you about our trip that we did a couple of years ago. The boat is based out of Portland, and we decided to head up that way. So here is a story of about 2.5 months of what we've done when we took a right turn going out of Portland. First of all, who are we? We are two entrepreneurs who are actually based in a kind of a bricks and sticks house in Dallas, Texas, and we've been there for decades. We have had experience with some dinghy racing on lasers, flying Scots. We've chartered a number of times, and then about 5 years ago, we decided that we really wanted our own cruising boat. So in 2019, we found the boat that we really enjoy the reviews and some of the history behind, and that's how we ended up with our current boat called Amazing Grace. So that was 4 years ago, and obviously we've done quite a bit of stuff since then.
And we would be remiss to not mention we are not alone on our boat when we live aboard. We do have a third crew member. She's actually been promoted to Admiral. So Corina, our boat cat, comes along with us everywhere we go.
So let us tell you a little bit about our boat, just so you have a context as to our trip. Our boat, Amazing Grace, it's a 37-foot southerly 115, built in 1987. One of the unique features of this boat, couple of them probably that are really relevant. One is that it's got a swing keel. It's a cast iron plate that the boat can be beached on, and also the second kind of an nuanced feature is it's got an indoor and outdoor helm. So it's got a dual helm station. So when we were coming up to Alaska, or when we were going in the wintertime up and down the Columbia River, and the weather gets really bad, we can kind of hide away. So that's our version of a hard Dodger. Our air draft is about 52 feet. We usually quoted 55 when we need a bridge lifted. Got a 39 horsepower Yanmar. And back when we did this trip, we had about 460 amp hours of AGM batteries, which we have since upgraded to lithium for this season to Alaska, because last 3 weeks we haven't seen shore power. So definitely worthwhile upgrade and a totally different presentation. And then we've got some solar panels on our stern that we can pull out and kind of supplement the power needs. So that's been very useful. As I said, swing keel. So that means on the Columbia River and actually many places around here, we have the advantage of being able to beach the boat. Sometimes that's just to go clean it up, sometimes to change anodes or grease the propeller. Sometimes it's just to get into a really shallow anchorage with 30 inches of draft. That really allows us to get into a lot of places on our boat. And we took advantage of that in some places, but certainly not required as far as an upstream trip goes.
So as Peter said, we were based in Portland, and for a while, I think the first 2 summers, we really hung around, went downstream, went up the Willamette. I've got a sister that lives in Hood River, so we went up as far as Hood River and really enjoyed kind of the gorge area. And in 2021, we started getting super curious about what happens when you go further upstream. So we did a lot of research, took a lot of notes, figured out all the locks and the bridges and where our possible stopping points that would make it not possible any further would be. And what we came to find out is that we could go all the way to the Tri-Cities in Washington, which is the Kennewick, Richland area. And then we could take a turn onto the Snake and we could make it all the way into Lewiston, Idaho. So we said, well, why not? We should go upstream. So that's what we did.
So,
And oh, go ahead. So 491 nautical miles each way. I'm sure many of you have been around the Columbia and Willamette, and I don't know how far upstream or downstream, but total miles of that is 325 navigable on the Columbia, 26 on the Willamette, and 140 navigable miles on the Snake River. There were 50 bridges total. The Columbia has 9 that opens. The Snake has 3. All of the rest of them are fixed. The closest air draft that made us super, super nervous was the one that was 51.8. And that one we'll talk a little bit about later. It was at Lyons Ferry up on the Snake River. But most of the bridges were much more comfortable than that for our 52-foot draft. There's also 8 dams with locks, 4 of them on the Columbia and 4 of them on the Snake River. And the total elevation change we thought was really interesting is 9 times the Panama Canal when you add those 8 together. So it's quite a bit of elevation you're going through. The only other point here is one thing that we found going up through both the Columbia and the Snake is we were in reverse tracing the Lewis and Clark expedition. Most of the towns along the way have Lewis and Clark monuments and or historical museums or exhibits. And we were basically just retracing those steps. So it really put us in that history tracing mood going through there.
luckily, we had a little bit better boat than they did.
Way better technology.
Way better technology, yeah. So conditions, what can you expect? And again, some of you have probably been up to through the Bonneville Dam. Some of you might have gone up to Hood River. It gets quite interesting going beyond. The prevailing winds we've seen were anywhere from complete calm and yep, Iron Jenny got put to use, and we've seen up to 47 knots and pretty steady. The one thing I would say is, yeah, the wind doesn't sound as bad even when it's, let's say, blowing 25 or 30, but if it's going against the current, you will get very short, steep, and frequent chop. We were in I think it was in Arlington, right there, and we were standing on the shore once we finally docked, and we were counting, and it was every 3 seconds there was a wave hitting the shore. So if you're beating into that, that can be a challenge. Currents, certainly the strongest part of the current is always the 2-3 miles below the dam. If you've gone through Bonneville, it's not that much different underneath the other ones. The only caveat there that we learned was if there is a heat wave in the area and people are running their air conditioning, that means the dams are running the generators more, which means they're releasing more water, which means you're going to have more current. And there is actually websites that will tell you exactly how much water is being released by the hour, so you can plan. If you can, for whatever reason, your engine's not keeping up with it, you can go usually in the morning when the current's less. Depths, not generally a problem. Like I said, there was a couple of places where our swing keel was handy to have just as a convenience, but certainly not a requirement. It is quite interesting to be in a relatively narrow, just a simple river-like channel and be looking at 150 feet of depth. The channel is narrow at times and not always exactly charted, or maybe charted but not marked with navigational aids. So this is not a cruise where you get, where you get to go down below and cook up a meal or something like that and just check outside every 10 or 15 minutes. This is something that truly requires careful navigation. The U.S. Coast Guard and has navigation charts that are free, electronic. So whatever your tool of choice is, there is no problem going all the way to Lewiston on these charts. The traffic that we saw on the lower Columbia, you've probably seen everything from the ro-ros to the bulk carriers, etc. These ocean going vessels do not go beyond Portland. What you end up with beyond Portland is barges. And sometimes that's barge with scrap metal. Sometimes that's a barge with grains. Sometimes it's a barge with trees. Sometimes it's just a different thing. On the fun side, this is a short video that we took as we were approaching Hood River. Obviously well known for its winds and for the sports out there. But we've seen a number of spots along the way where you get these kite surfers coming by. They come pretty close to the boat. And as we told them, we're much bigger and heavier and we can't avoid you, so you better get out of the way. But the other part of this is kind of more practical aspect, which is when you see kite surfers out there ahead and you are probably sitting somewhere with 5 knots or maybe thinking of flying a spinnaker, if this is what you see through the binoculars ahead, that probably means there are much stronger winds there. 15, 20, 25 knots is not unusual. So that was one of our cues as we were navigating, that these people were for us to say, hey, is our sail trim where it needs to be? Because we're about to see some stronger winds. So one of the things, because we're geeks, we created an entire spreadsheet that basically said all the different marinas and services availability, because surprisingly there is no particularly like guides or like really detailed documentation. So we just created a spreadsheet, noted the mileage on the river, dam, how much of a elevation difference there is, what's the website, what's the phone number for the marina, for is there pump out available, whatever was available. That was our tool, kind of a self-made. Fuel was certainly a concern, even though we're a sailboat. We wanted to make sure we're not leaving ourselves somewhere high and dry. The last place actually we took on fuel was in the Tri-Cities areas, and then we did the Snake River all the way up and down on the same tank of fuel. And it wasn't really a problem. If you were to go all the way to Idaho, I think the only fuel there available is like a commercial. You'd have to order like a truck or something like that to have it delivered.
Yeah, you have to get jerry cans and carry it over.
Yeah. So some research is certainly required, but well worth it in our opinion. The reward for all that planning is you get to be in some astonishing places, and vast majority of the time it was empty and we had the place all to ourselves. Anchorages, guest docks, park docks, etc. It was very much all to ourselves, even throughout the summer, which one would consider sailing season.
So timing wise, speaking of through the summer, we looked a little bit at the history of the winds, and that was a big part of our decision making. We decided to go upstream mid to late summer. I think it was August into September.
We started mid-July.
Yeah. So we wanted to get the winds from the west so that we could sail more than motor. And then we also noticed that by mid-September, the winds generally switch over and you get mostly winds from the east. So we timed our trip that way. We were able to get 60 plus, about 60% sailing on the upstream, which of course includes the motoring of getting, in and out of anchorages and through the locks, which is most of the motoring there. And then downstream, we ended up having to motor more. The winds didn't turn as much as the tracking and forecast said that it was supposed to, but we still got in a good 30% of sailing, which is not too bad. But we got back, I think, late October.
By Halloween.
Yeah.
Yeah, and nice thing is sailing upstream is actually more fuel efficient, if you will, because you're going up against the current. So on the downstream, even though the winds may not cooperate
Yeah, you're
exactly,
riding it.
you're riding the current.
Absolutely. So it was super hot in summer of 2021. It was one of the massive heat waves of the Portland area there. So it was in the hundreds a lot of the time. So we had to rig up some shade cloths and figure out how we could not suffer too much there. But oh my goodness, the way that that created just the most beautiful skies was worth it. And it actually increased the amount of west winds we were getting going in. And it was like following us through the canyon so that we could just stay on a downwind, wing on wing, and just continue with the wind, even when the canyons would twist and turn.
Yeah, you definitely don't get too much beam reach sailing on this trip.
Yeah. And then, of course, by late September, early October, all the colors started to change before our eyes, which was just beautiful because when we were on the southbound, we were able to see the same exact landscape. But then with all the bright colors of the oranges and reds that we had just seen all green going upstream.
Yeah. Yeah, one of our favorite stops still is obviously Beacon Rock. Probably many of you have made a trip up there. But as we were following the fall colors downstream, this is picture from when we docked there. It was just absolutely incredible. But we have dozens and dozens and dozens of amazing photos from this trip. So talking a little bit more about some of the logistics, as Adrian said, there is on the Columbia River 50 bridges. The lowest one, and this is kind of a trick thing on the chart, it said 51.8 feet. That is not the same as 51 feet 8 inches. And then when you start talking to people, there is a lot of opinions about what the water level is, depending on what the dams are releasing, whether it's accurate or not. So there was one particular bridge, as Adrian has already mentioned, that really gave us a lot of heartache, whether we were going to be able to fit. We did both directions, luckily. The opening bridges, similar as we're used to in the Portland area, you call them up on the radio. Some of them stay open, and only when a train is going by, they close it and they'll announce it on VHF, so you know what to expect. This is one of the bridges up in the Richland area where we got, like, you know, you put 5 people together, you get 6 opinions. Well, this was like we got 4 different charts together and we got 4 different readings as to what the clearance of this railroad bridge was. So I actually called the operator on the bridge and said, hey, we're going to be coming up, we're planning this trip, we just want to make sure we can fit. What is your clearance? He had no idea, and his answer was literally, well, why don't you just come up here and we'll eyeball it? Which, needless to say, that was not a very good answer for us. So then there was also the Kennewick Cable Bridge. There was varying reports as far as where that goes. Well, our saving grace for Amazing Grace was there was an American Cruise Line route that was taking off as we were leaving Walla Walla. And so we just picked up the VHF and called the captain on the bridge and said, hey, what's your air draft? And the captain said something like 54, 53, yeah, somewhere in the low 50s. And
tiny bit bigger than us.
Tiny bit bigger than us. And we said, so where are you going? And he said, oh, we're going up to Richland for an overnight. So we knew that if he can go through there, we'll fit through there. We also you talked to the captain on a smaller cruise ship that goes all the way up to Idaho. And
she promised me through Lions Ferry. So.
Yeah, she made it through Lions Ferry, but they did tell us that depending on the time of year and everything else, that it does change, and they usually put somebody on the very top deck from the crew to advise the captain if there is any kind of possibility of a collision. So the bridges are tricky, but like I said, 52, 53 feet of air draft should not be a problem. This is actually the bridge. It's a fixed bridge just beyond Lions Ferry. We approached very, very, very slowly. Last but not least, this bridge is all the way in Lewiston, Idaho, and this is pretty much where the navigable portion of the Snake River ends. This bridge does lift. I think it lifts to about 42 feet. So if you've got a smaller, like a motorboat or smaller sailboat, you could go through there. The Marina is like 2 miles past it, and then it's Wild Rapids on the Snake River. So you're not going to go further there anyways. from what we understand from the locals, the operators do not like to open this bridge very often. So proceed at your own risk, but there is plenty of mooring opportunities before that. So besides the bridges, the question we get the most is about the dams and the locks, 4 on the Columbia, 4 on the Snake. It is intimidating. I'm not gonna joke with you. I think going through Bonneville is a great practice run because they have experience with the people and with people going for the first time. Beyond that, you get to the Dallas Dam, to the McNary, all of those other dams, they see very, very little recreational traffic. So, and when you enter these locks, it is a giant concrete canyon that's twice as tall as our mast, and it is very intimidating. However, it's doable. A little bit of practice, a little bit of preparation, put on your PFD. They require that. Communicate with the lock master. We learned at the Dallas Dam to always request that they run the water slower than they run it for the barges, because they must have cranked it up. I mean, we were rising probably at 1 foot per second, and it created a lot of turbulence. And there was a point in time where we thought we were going to lose one of our lines and just figure out what needs to happen. So it was challenging, but you can make it through. Communicate, be prepared, understand what you're getting yourself into. Have a lot of fenders, have a couple of long mooring lines. Going down is definitely much easier than going up. We had one experience at a dam where they have the guillotine closing system. I think that might have been this one, and we had 30 knots on the tail. It just pushing us in. I mean, I was in neutral, and then we were still making about 4 knots entering the lock. And when you see 100-foot tall concrete wall in front of you, the last thing you want to do is not have very good control. So we had one experience when we entered, and there's usually 4 bits along the wall. The first one we don't like to tie up to because that's too close to the gate. The next one, yeah, this is one of the guillotine designs. The next one, the second or third one is our preferred. Well, the second one, because we had all this wind, we missed. So I said, okay, we're going to go to the third one. We pull up to the third one where there is an indentation in the wall and there is no bit to tie up to. So the only option was the fourth one, which your bow is pretty much right against the 100-foot concrete wall. So inside of this lock, which is 86 feet wide with a 37-foot boat, I made a U-turn with 30-knot winds on the beam and tied up still on the port side, but facing downstream, which then, of course, the radio operator got on there and says, "Are you in the lock? Because we can't see you." So there, again, I don't want to scare anybody off because it's absolutely doable, but just be prepared, be cool-headed, communicate with the lock master, communicate with your crew, whoever's on the boat, have assigned roles. It's very much a doable and worth it.
Yeah, and this one actually, this is the Lower Monumental, so it's up on the Snake River. I think it's the last one, right?
Yeah, I
Before
think so.
Charleston. But they really are not used to seeing pleasure craft up on the Snake River. So this particular one, there was a very large barge that there are scheduled times when pleasure craft are allowed to go through. At other times, commercial traffic always gets priority. And we beat the pleasure craft time by like 10 minutes, I think. So there was a commercial barge coming up behind us, and he actually asked the lock master if he could share the lock with us. And we just sat quietly and prayed because that sounded really terrifying to us. And we just breathed a sigh of relief when the lock master came on, and we just remember his words, "The sailboat goes alone." And we were like, thank goodness that they did not suggest that that was a good idea, but they're just really not used to having pleasure craft up there.
Yeah. I think we've got 5 more minutes left, so we're gonna probably move along with this. And let me see here. Let's talk about some of our favorite stops.
Yep.
Just a couple of them. One of them was Crow Butte.
Yeah, Crow Butte is probably about 2/3 up the Columbia. Behind a little island. It's a Native American little town, village property there. But they had the park, yeah, and they had an RV park there as well. And amazingly maintained docks available free of charge. Just come and go as you wish. And there was so much space available. Of course, there's no pleasure crafts, but it was also lovely. It was walking distance to the Alexandria winery there. So quite a bit hike to go up the hill to get to it, but certainly worth it.
And that's probably one of the other things that we quickly realized, and probably just even cruising on the lower Columbia, every time we stopped and we wanted to go ashore, we kind of had to decide, are we doing wine tasting or beer tasting? Because there's a lot of breweries and a lot of wineries around there. So definitely plenty of entertainment. I'm gonna fast forward us to
Arrival.
our arrival in Idaho. So we did a day trip to Idaho because the dock there, we weren't 100% sure that it was a good idea with a 37-foot boat to tie up there overnight. So we stayed most of the time in Clarkston, but this was the dock in actual Lewiston where we could get out, walk around town and say that we've been in the Idaho waters. Beautiful place, certainly worthwhile to walk around. A lot of Native American focused art, a lot of little stores. It was just, and very, of course, Lewiston, Clarkston, they have even a breweries named for each and everything else. So obviously very much a kind of a Lewis and Clark inspired.
And one thing that was super fun is beyond that blue bridge that we talked about, only the little jet powered boats can get up there because of the rapids and because of the low clearance. But there's a place up there called Hell's Canyon, which apparently is North America's deepest river gorge at about 8,000 feet. And it is deeper than the Grand Canyon. And we had no idea it actually was right there. So we ended up buying a seat on one of these jet boat tours just to go up and check out Hell's Canyon. But absolutely stunning up there.
Yeah. So it was a tremendous trip. We're trying to condense 2.5 months of experiences into 30 minutes, and hopefully leave a space for a couple of questions. But just a few reflections to share, some things. So one of the things that was most surprising.
Yeah, I think so few boats go up there. I remember when we first arrived they call it Hell's Canyon Resort, which is the Marina in Clarkston.
Not quite a resort.
Yeah, I kind of joke when I say resort because it's a rundown little marina that they just never get guests. But when we pulled in there, a guy ran to grab our lines and just started shouting that we were the first people he's seen in 2 years. So super fun to just see like how untouched this area is.
Yeah. And what was probably the scariest thing was the Dallas lock when we failed to communicate with the lockmaster who wasn't used to pleasure craft. We had somewhere further up in one of the locks, we even had somebody go, well, it only goes one speed. And we're like, can we revisit that, please? So that was definitely a scary experience when, you're holding on to the mooring line, you're holding on to the bit, you've got it kind of cleated, but it's really shoving you around. All could have been avoided. And like I said, we did a really good job to make sure every time we were coming up, have the fenders, have this, have that, and communicate with them.
And we learned better ways to tie up lines
Yeah,
because of that. We
we did.
changed the way we tied up from that point forward. The most peaceful anchorage is this place called New York Island, which was just before you get to Clarkston, and it's just so serene and just these insanely beautiful desert looking cliffs. But we ended up staying there like 3 or 4 days at that anchorage just because we didn't want to leave. Most dramatic scenery was the Basalt Cliffs, which again is way up on the Snake, and just the carvings through that area, just truly stunning.
And the last reflection was, what was most inspiring is these are truly the backyard opportunities for anybody sailing out of Portland. And even though we have gone all the way up to Idaho, that's kind of the furthest North American inland port that's navigable. It does not require going all the way to Idaho to enjoy some of the backyard opportunities that are available to you. To some of you, it might be Beacon Rock. To some of you, it might be Cascade Locks. To some of you, it might be Hood River. And to some of you, maybe going up to the Tri-Cities. A lot of clubs along the way, a lot of places to stop. You don't have to do a very long day. So hopefully our presentation is providing a little bit of inspiration for you to go beyond. We've got a pretty detailed captain's logs, the spreadsheet that we kind of share a screenshot of about the bridges and dams and places to stop. So if there is somebody who's planning this trip, feel free to reach out to us through our website, and we'll be happy to share a copy of what was current as of 2021. It'll give you a great head start to start planning that. And I think we're just a few moments over, but I'll hand it back to Chris, I guess.
Any quick questions for Peter and Adrian? Questions?
I got a question, that is, I'm a trailer sailor, so I don't really wanna go up and down, I wanna go up and park it and come down the boat. Is there a legal place to park it up in Clarkston or Lewiston that doesn't look too smelly?
Yeah, that's actually a really popular way that the few people we did see, that's exactly what they did. There's a lot of state parks up in there where there's parking lots that people would launch their smaller boats and just kind of hang around the area where they launched. I remember the first park on Snake River is called Fish Hook Park, and that was the most popular because we were there on Labor Day weekend. And there were a whole bunch of people dropping their boats for Labor Day weekend, but they would just stay right around Fish Hook and not go.
That's not my question. My question was, if I wanna go from Lewiston to Portland, is there a place in Lewiston or Clarkston where you can park your car and your trailer and leave it there for 3 weeks? It doesn't look sketchy.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, no,
I would say the Hell's Canyon Resort, that's, even though, yeah, like I said, the docks, etc., wasn't in great condition, but they have an RV park there and everything else. So I would say talk to the marina at the Hell's Canyon Resort. There's a couple other marinas in the Lewiston Clarkston area, and I don't see a problem why you couldn't make a deal with someone to say, hey, I just need to park my car and trailer here for a couple, 3-4 weeks while I take a trip.
I have a question about the locks in general. I mean, my boat goes maybe 6.5 knots, maybe 7, and you got 6 knots of current. How did you deal with that?
Well, our boat is 37 feet overall, and based on the water line, our theoretical max speed through water is 7 knots. So yeah, you're gonna pump some diesel or some gas through your engine and keep up with it. We've gone through Bonneville Dam a number of times, and there's been times where we were barely making half a knot against the current. So it's not, you don't have to have a huge engine. You don't have to be going, 15 knots into it. But I would say, again, there is websites that the Army Corps of Engineer keeps up as far as how much water they're releasing. And those are very accurate. So that's very helpful.
Well, and we always tee up at Beacon Rock before we go through Bonneville, because that's the like most flow and most current through there. And Beacon Rock, I think, is only 3 miles.
Yep.
So we're teeing ourselves up, so we have plenty of time to get through there, even if we can only travel at half a knot. And then Cascade Locks is just on the other side of Bonneville
stop there.
Dam, so you can stop pretty quickly after. So even if it takes you hours to make it upstream, you can still, tee up before and have a safe place to stop after.
I would also say that I don't think we did 2 dams in a single day.
Never did 2 dams in a day.
Yeah,
No.
so and in general, I want to say, don't exactly quote me on that, but within 5-8 miles before every dam, there was a place where we would kind of tee up the day before or a couple days before and be able to go into the dam. So it's not like we try to leave it for the very last moment. Hopefully that helps.
All right, that looks like we have all our questions. Thank you, Peter and Adrian.
All right,
Our pleasure.
guys.
Thank you so much.
Folks have a great trip up north.
Thank
All right,
you.
Thanks.
Yeah.